So in this lesson, we're going to evaluate how to quickly frame up this particular project. Some of the information is absolutely important that you have down correctly, and some of it, the builder is going to use his own techniques in actually to frame the particular project. So it's very imperative that we make sure that we identify the parts and pieces that are imperative and other parts and pieces that are more or less generic. So how do we actually frame this project out? Well, first of all, we're going to create a couple of layers. I've already got them in my particular project, Deck Layer 1 and Deck Layer 2, and I call it Deck Structural. I'm going to start with this layer. And thinking about the actual construction of a deck, we need a ledger board that goes up against the house. So picking up all the points of the home, I'm simply going to identify or draw a polyline that frames out the house, and in this particular case, it'll frame around the chimney as well. And I'm just using my intersection option to pick up all the points, and I'm zooming in and out just by rolling my mouse. And this is where the ledger board will be around the entire project. So once I've got this in place, I'll press enter. The ledger board is a 2x10 or 2x8 depending on the wood framing. So I'm going to offset that, the thickness of the board, which is 1.5 inches. And that's what will come off the home. So that's how we frame around the house. Now in some cases we don't do vertical framing this way, but I've shown it this way just because it makes sense in this particular project. Then we need to frame around the outer edge. So once again, I'll pick up the polyline command, and I'm just framing the upper level of the deck. So from here, I'm not going to pick up that board here. I'm going to pick it up from this edge. Why? This board will actually have a little bit of a nosing on the edge. And that nosing is just about 1/2 inch, maybe 3/4 of an inch at most. So the deck edge hangs over the actual boarding. So I'm just going to click on the outer edge of this. And I'm just picking up the first level of the deck. The second level I'm going to treat separately, so it doesn't become part of this equation. There we go. And once again, with polyline, when I go to offset it, so I know the distance that I'm going to be offsetting is this distance right in here. So I'll offset it, and I'll use T and enter for through, and I'm going to offset it from there to there. I have a 1-inch overhang in this particular case. I want a nice deep sort of profile. The boards are going to be 6 inches wide, so I'm decided on that. It's an arbitrary decision. You should have some sort of overhang. This last board shouldn't be flush with it because it's a finishing board. You don't want to have the sideboard sticking out further than the edge board. So that's what I have. Now that I'm going to offset 1.5 inches, the thickness of the boards as well. So offset 1.5. And that gives me the outer edge of the board. Okay, I don't need this layer on anymore. So I have a deck finish pattern 1. I'm going to turn that layer off. Just scroll down. It's working just a bit slower than I'd like. There we go. And I don't need any finishing pattern. So there's the outer edge of my framing. Now I can connect the pieces from one side to the other. I can do an offset a fillet in this particular case. So I'm just going to go to fillet, make sure it's a 0 radius fillet. So this ledger board will actually extend all the way out to this member. And this ledger board will stick straight out and attach to that member. Okay. And I'll do the same at this end here. And I will fillet these two ends here. Great. Now this is the board that I'm going to offset eventually 2 feet in to find the edge of the beam. And that's how we work with it. Now looking at the diagram in regards to what my spacing of my joists are, I simply start at one end and work my way to the other. So I just pulled up the drawing. I know it's a completed drawing, but the drawing with the actual notes that I have that are in the ledger. And this gives me my spacing, what I've selected. These are all 2x8s, but I noticed in here that zone 1 is at 16-inch centers. So that's this section through here. That's zone 1, which will lead right to the edge of that corner. Zone 2 is 2x8s, but at 12 inches on center. So starting in that corner, I'm going to go 12-inch centers until I finish the entire of zone 2. There's zone 3, which starts at that corner, and zone 3 is at 16-inch centers once again. Okay, so that's how we're going to draw this. So I'm simply going to draw a line from this corner straight down, and I will offset that 16 inches. So that is the right side of the board. And what I need to do then is, that's a center line distance. So I have outer edge to outer edge 16. So now I'm going to offset by 1.5 the thickness of a 2x8 inward. That's important. Now I don't care about the length because eventually I'm going to be trimming that all off. Now in this particular case, as it comes to this edge in here, this is all a rectangle. I could trim it now, but I'm going to leave it as is. And I'm going to use a method where I copy the previous two boards from this base point. So the base point of the left joist I'm going to bring in, and then I can copy that to these different points. Now this is where you have to sort of look at the project and determine what makes a lot of sense. Notice this board here is going to be off that corner. Now if I'm actually framing, I would make sure that I have a board at that corner. From here on end, it's 12 inches on center. So I can either move this into that point or move the whole selection in from that point. It doesn't matter. If I move it inwards right here, it may give the appearance that it's going to be 12 inches on center starting earlier. Now, why don't I care about moving that inwards? Because I've got a whole bunch of different posts here for my screening. So therefore it makes sense to actually have the wood closer together. I have less blocking to actually do. So I'm going to move this entire selection grouping from this last point here down to that corner. So now when I block in here for my screen, I don't have to block across 16 inches. I'm just blocking through a shorter distance. I'm trying to make sense of all this and what would be the most efficient way of building this if I actually were a builder. So let's go and trim off all of these to that point. And there is my line work there. All right, the next series all the way up to here is 12-inch centers. So I'm going to copy, I'm going to use this end, this from here, 12 inches to the right, and there I have it. Now, again, I'm slightly off on the corner. How would a framer actually deal with this? Is this acceptable or not? That really depends on the framer. You're really not going to be particular in that because they're not going to frame it exactly the way you are. They're going to frame it the way they see fit. So I can leave that and then do an array of offsets, or I can edge that up. It doesn't really matter how you prefer to do this. I'm going to leave this as is and simply copy this group from that corner point. And what I'm doing is I'm picking the outer edge each time. Once I've got 3 or 4 of these, as I've shown here, now it's easier to copy this entire group from that point to that point and that point and move all the way through here. So I want to visually demonstrate what it is I'm creating so that the builder can see that, yeah, these are 16s, these are, but where they actually end up, like I said, it's completely up to them. One of the things you'll find out as a designer, or you'll learn very quickly as a designer, you really shouldn't be telling people what to do. I mean, the builders know a lot better than you do how this framing will actually come to pass. You understand sort of the numbers and what you've come up with, but they actually know how to build it. So I rarely ever tell a builder what to do. I quite quite often confirm with the builder, is this something that you would consider as a proper way of doing it, or would you like me to revise my drawing? And that always makes the builder feel a lot better when I'm willing to revise my drawing to suit their need as opposed to the other way around. So now I'm going to simply trim off this outer edge here. And I'm using crossing in all of these. This needs for me to zoom in and do individual selections. And I'm zooming in and out. You can see how that's coming to pass. Now, what about this end in here? Okay, well, I've got a couple of choices. This ledger board could actually continue on and be part of this joist or part of this rim board, or I can draw a separate unit altogether. So I'm going to draw a separate one because at this point it switches to 16-inch centers. So I'm going to offset that distance. In here it's 1.5. And I'll take that piece and move it inwards. And then I'll go 12-inch center or 16-inch centers from that. So I will copy this. And it doesn't matter where you click for the base point. You just simply type in 16. Just to make sure, because it's very easy to make a mistake. If I measure between this and this, what do I have? 1'2", that's 14.5 inches. That's correct. And now, since this is a rectangle, I'm going to trim it right away. Not that it makes a difference, it's just different techniques. And this allows me to then copy this. So I'm going to copy this, and then it's the right size right from the get-go. Again, I apologize. My mouse is responding very slowly to my commands as I max out the computer that I'm using right now with videotaping and some of the other things that I have going on at the same time in order to be able to prepare these lessons. Now, as we come to the end, they may or may not work, and you can see I'm slightly out. I'm out by that margin. So it's slightly less than the width of a joist. So it makes more sense to actually move this entire grouping from where I have it here to there, and therefore the last spacing is slightly less than 16 inches on center. So there's your framing. It's not that hard to do. You have to consider some of the other elements and how you'll block for them. So I introduced to you very briefly the SG7 document, and there's different methods of framing for the handrail as well as for the screen. Now the screen and the handrail, I should say, you really block the same way. All you have to draw here are the components and their sizes. So for instance, if the screen posts you've designed are 4 inch by 4 inch, you type in here at 3.5 comma negative 3.5. Remember, we always use the actual dimensions when we're drawing our elements. If you've got a 6 by 6 screening, or 6 by 6 post for your screen, the actual size is 5.5 comma minus 5.5. And sometimes if I haven't made the decision on the sizes, I may actually look at the proportions of the deck to make that decision. I really like the 6-footer or the 6-inch post a bit better. It seems to be proportionally better in size. So let me zoom in on this and delete that 4-inch post. Again, my computer's really slow in responding to this, but let's see, I'm going to delete that. There we go. Now this post we're going to show as a structural member, so we draw an X through it. So I'm just using the line command and drawing an X in this direction. Sorry about that. And another one here. Now, if I want to maintain this as a single element, I can select all of them and use the group command. And now it's a single object. It just makes for easier use. Just going to try to slow down a bit so help the computer keep up with me. And then I'm going to copy this screen from here to here. And I'm going to measure the distance between the two. And I'll go up into our tools and inquiry distance to see how many more posts I want in between here. So that's about 12 feet. So I can have posts at around 6-foot centers or somewhere around 4-foot centers, and it will give me that nice sort of patterned look between that. At 11-foot 7 and 9/16, it's slightly less than 4-foot centers. So we can either divide the space up into 3 equal parts, or we can just measure them at a 4 and then make the last one a slightly different distance.